The most dangerous woman in Chicago was not the one holding a gun. She was the one a mafia king couldn't own. Avery Monroe knew the invitation was a trap the moment she saw her name written in silver ink. Outside the Calder Hotel, snow fell over black cars. Silent bodyguards, and men who smiled like they had already buried their enemies. Inside, champagne glittered under chandeliers, but every whisper carried a threat. Dominic Wolfe had warned her not to come. But Avery had spent her whole life watching powerful men confuse protection with possession. Tonight, she would walk into their world on her own terms. Stay until the end, because this is not just a story about danger, desire, and betrayal. It is about the price of being chosen, not owned. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. And the reason Avery Monroe walked into that glittering trap began long before the first glass of champagne was poured. 3 nights earlier, Chicago had been quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel private. Snow pressed against the windows of Avery's apartment above a closed bookstore in Lincoln Park. The street below glowed under amber lamps. A delivery truck groaned past the curb. Somewhere a couple laughed as they hurried through the cold, their voices disappearing into the wind. Avery sat barefoot at her kitchen table with a black invitation card between her fingers. The card was thick, expensive, and cold to the touch. Silver letters shimmered across the front. The Calder Winter Foundation Gala, hosted by Grant Keller. Avery had read the words 5 times before turning the card over. That was when her breath caught. On the back, written by hand in sharp black ink, was one sentence. For the woman he thinks he owns. She stared at it until the letters seemed to move. Not because she was afraid, because whoever had written it knew exactly where to cut. Avery Monroe had grown up around powerful men. She knew how they spoke when they wanted something. She knew the softness they put in their voices before asking for loyalty, obedience, silence. She knew how easily the word protection could become a locked door. Her father had taught her that. Samuel Monroe had never carried a gun in front of her. He never came home with blood on his shirt or bruises on his knuckles. He wore wool coats, polished shoes, and reading glasses that slid down his nose when he worked late into the night. To the neighbors, he was a widowed accountant with a quiet daughter and a love for old jazz records. But Avery learned young that numbers could be more dangerous than bullets. When she was 9, she used to sit under his desk with a sketchbook while men came to the house after midnight. Their voices would fall low in the study, all velvet and threat. They smelled like cigar smoke, rain cologne, and fear hidden under expensive fabric. Her father would pour coffee, never whiskey. Coffee meant business. Whiskey meant grief. Avery remembered one night more clearly than the others. She had been coloring the roof of a little house in blue pencil when 2 men began arguing above her. One of them slammed a hand on the desk. Samuel did not flinch. He only said very quietly, "The loudest man in the room is usually the poorest liar." The room went silent. After the men left, Samuel looked under the desk and found Avery watching him. He did not scold her. He sat on the floor beside her, loosened his tie, and tapped the tip of her pencil against the page. "Never watch the man who shouts 'kiddo,'" he told her. "Watch the man everyone checks before they speak." Avery had not understood the full meaning then, but she remembered the rhythm of it. The way her father's voice carried sadness beneath the lesson. As if he was teaching her how to survive a world he hoped she would never enter. By the time she was 16, she could walk into a restaurant and know which table mattered. She could tell when a smile was real, when a handshake was forced, when a man was pretending not to be afraid. Samuel said she had her mother's eye for beauty and his curse for patterns. Then, when she was 20, Samuel disappeared from the old life. At least, that was what he called it. He sold the house in Oak Park, moved into a modest place near Lake Forest, and stopped taking calls from men whose names never appeared in newspapers unless they were donating to hospitals. He told Avery he was done. He told her people could become clean if they walked far enough away from the dirt. Avery wanted to believe him. She built a life that had nothing to do with ledgers or favors, or men who owned judges the way other men owned watches. She studied architectural restoration. She learned how to bring old buildings back without destroying what made them worth saving. She worked with cracked stone rotting wood forgotten hotels, theaters with water damage, mansions with secrets trapped under plaster. Buildings made sense to her. They carried scars honestly. People did not. That was why Dominic Wolfe unsettled her from the beginning. He entered her life 6 months before Grant Keller's invitation arrived on a rainy afternoon inside a private club near the Chicago River. The building had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, a once elegant place where politicians drank with businessmen and made decisions that changed neighborhoods without anyone outside the room knowing. Dominic had bought it through a holding company. Avery knew that before she accepted the consultation. She also knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew Dominic Wolfe even if they pretended not to. His name moved through the city like a shadow behind closed doors. He owned restaurants that never had empty tables. He owned freight contracts along the river. He owned security companies, construction firms, and favors that could make a problem vanish before breakfast. He was not the kind of man women like Avery were supposed to meet alone in dark buildings. But she had gone anyway because the club was a masterpiece hidden beneath neglect, and because she refused to let fear decide which rooms she entered. The first time she saw him, he was standing beneath a broken skylight while rain tapped through the cracked glass onto the marble floor. He wore a black overcoat and no expression. 2 men stood near the door, still as statues. Dominic looked less like an owner than a verdict. Avery had stepped around a puddle, opened her folder, and said, "Your ceiling is dying." One of his men blinked. Dominic looked at her for a long second. Then he said, "Good afternoon to you, too." She should have been intimidated, maybe part of her was. But intimidation had never impressed her much. It was usually just theater for men who were worried someone might see through them. Avery walked him through the damage. Water intrusion near the south wall. Structural stress in the balcony. Original tile under layers of cheap flooring. Mold in the private dining rooms. An electrical system that looked like a death wish. Dominic listened. That was the first thing she noticed. Powerful men often pretended to listen while waiting for their turn to speak. Dominic did not. He watched the building when she pointed. He asked precise questions. He remembered details she mentioned only once. When she told him the west staircase could be saved, his eyes shifted toward it. "You sound sure," he said. "I am sure. Most people hedge when they speak to me. Most people probably want something from you. And you don't. I want you not to ruin a beautiful building because you are impatient." One of the men by the door coughed like he had swallowed a laugh. Dominic looked at him once. The man became silent. Then Dominic looked back at Avery. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not enough to call it a smile. Enough to be dangerous. Their work meetings became longer after that. At first, they spoke only about stonewood permits, contractors, and budgets. Then, the conversations widened. Avery learned that Dominic hated sweet coffee, but drank it anyway when she brought the wrong order. She learned he preferred silence to small talk. She learned he had a scar along his left hand that he never explained. She learned he could make a room colder without raising his voice. Dominic learned things too. He learned Avery talked faster when she was angry. She touched old walls like she was listening to them. She hated being interrupted. She kept a pencil behind her ear and forgot it was there. She could look him in the eye even when his own men lowered theirs. One evening, during a storm, they stood in the unfinished main lounge while thunder rolled over the river. Plastic sheets covered the furniture. The air smelled like dust and wet concrete. Avery had spread blueprints across a table and circled a measurement in red. "This is wrong," she said. Dominic stood beside her close enough that she could feel the heat from his coat sleeve. The engineer approved it. "Then the engineer is wrong. He is expensive. So is fixing a collapse." Dominic looked down at her. "You know who I am, and you still argue with me." Avery kept her eyes on the blueprint. "I argue with bad measurements. You just happen to be standing near them." A quiet beat passed. Then Dominic laughed. It was not loud. It was barely more than breath. But it changed the room. Avery looked up before she could stop herself. For one unguarded second, Dominic Wolfe looked almost human. That was the problem. Cruel men were easy to resist. Arrogant men were boring. But a dangerous man with restraint. A man who listened more than he spoke, a man who looked at Avery like she was not a decoration or a problem but a storm. He respected that kind of man could ruin a woman's good sense. Avery knew better. She reminded herself often. Still, there were moments. Dominic walking her to her car without touching her back. Dominic sending a contractor home because the man raised his voice at her. Dominic standing in silence while she spoke to a preservation board and watching as if every word mattered. Dominic remembering that she hated white roses because they looked like apologies from men who planned to lie again. He never asked her to dinner, not directly. He never crossed the line, not physically. But he learned the edges of her life with the patience of a man studying a locked room. Avery noticed. So did Ethan Cole. Ethan was Dominic's right hand, though he looked more like a tired graduate student than the second most dangerous man in a criminal organization. He had sharp eyes, neat suits, and the rare courage to speak to Dominic like he was not made of loaded weapons. Avery liked him immediately. One afternoon, while Dominic took a call near the club entrance, Ethan stood beside Avery as she examined old crown molding. "You scare him," Ethan said. Avery did not look away from the wall. "I seriously doubt that. You don't scare him the way bullets scare people. That is comforting. You scare him because he cannot decide where to put you." That made her pause. Ethan continued, voice calm. "People are usually enemies, assets, liabilities, or family. You don't fit." Avery glanced toward Dominic, who was speaking quietly into his phone, eyes dark under the low light. "Maybe he should stop trying to categorize people," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'll put that in the suggestion box." She should have walked away then. Not from the building. From the pull. From the quiet gravity of Dominic Wolfe becoming too present in her thoughts. But life rarely gives warnings in a language people want to hear. The real warning came at her apartment door 2 days before the gala. Avery had been making tea wearing jeans and an old gray sweater when someone knocked. Not the polite knock of a neighbor, not the impatient knock of a delivery driver. 2 firm taps, then silence. She knew before she opened the door. Dominic stood in the hallway, black coat, dusted with snow, face unreadable. No guards visible. No Ethan. Just him, filling the narrow space outside her apartment like trouble dressed for a funeral. Avery leaned against the doorframe. "You look like bad news in a coat." His eyes moved over her face, quick and searching as if checking for harm. "Do not go to Keller's gala. No hello. No explanation. Just the order." Avery's fingers tightened around the edge of the door. "Well, she said it is always nice when a man starts with manners." Dominic did not smile. "I am serious. That was clear from the part where you sounded like a commandment." Avery, her name in his mouth was always a problem. He said it low, controlled, almost careful. Like something breakable. Like something dangerous. She hated that part of her, liked it. "What is Grant Keller to you?" she asked. Dominic's jaw shifted. A rival. That is a very clean word for a very dirty answer. He owns the Calder. He has money in Atlantic City, Miami, and now Chicago. He has been buying loyalty from men who should know better. Men in your world always think loyalty is something that can be bought. It often is. At least you are honest. His eyes hardened slightly. Keller is hosting that gala to measure the room, to see who is afraid of him, who is willing to stand near him, who is ready to move against me. And I was invited because Dominic said nothing. Avery stepped back from the door, allowing the cold hallway air to enter the warm apartment. Answer me. His gaze dropped for 1 second to her hand on the door, then returned to her face. Because he wants to see if I react. The apartment became too quiet. Avery thought of the black card on her kitchen table, the sentence written on the back, the deliberate cruelty of it for the woman he thinks he owns. She let out a slow breath. So I am bait. Dominic's voice lowered. You are a target. There is a difference. Yes. Explain it. Bait is chosen because it is disposable. A target is chosen because it matters. The words struck harder than they should have. Avery looked away, first angry at herself for feeling anything. Beyond the windows, snow blurred the streetlights into soft halos. The apartment smelled like mint tea and old paper. Her safe little world suddenly felt thin like painted glass. How does Keller know I matter? She asked. Dominic hesitated. That hesitation told her enough. Avery turned back. Dominic. Something passed across his face. Not fear, not guilt exactly, something close to both buried under control. A private file was taken from my network. A business file numb. She waited. A personal risk assessment. The words entered the room slowly. Avery stared at him. A file on me. On people who could be used against me. People. Yes. And my name was there. Yes. How high? Dominic did not answer. Her stomach turned cold. How high, Dominic? At the top. For a moment, all she heard was the radiator ticking behind her and the muffled scrape of tires on snow outside. Avery stepped back another inch. Dominic noticed. He always noticed. You made a file on me, she said. I made a file to keep you alive. You do hear the problem in that sentence, don't you? Do you? His voice stayed controlled, but something strained beneath it. Keller has men who do not hesitate. He will not come at me directly if he thinks there is a softer place to cut. And I am the soft place. No, do not lie to make it prettier. Dominic looked at her, then really looked, and the air changed. You are not soft, he said. That is why this is dangerous. Avery folded her arms to stop herself from reacting. Let me guess. You want me to stay home? Lock my door, let you handle it. I want you away from him. That is not the same as asking what I want. Your wants do not change the threat. No, but they do change what you have the right to decide. Dominic went still. There it was. The line between them, the one he kept approaching without crossing, the one she had guarded since girlhood. Avery had watched men claim they were protecting women while shrinking their lives inch by inch. Do not go there. Do not wear that. Do not speak to him. Do not ask questions. Trust me, I know better. It always began with concern. It always ended with a door closing. Dominic seemed to understand that she was not only arguing with him, she was arguing with every man who had ever mistaken fear for love. His voice softened, though it did not lose its edge. You do not have to obey me. How generous. But do not mistake your freedom for safety. Avery's laugh came out without humor. And do not mistake your fear for authority. That hit him. She saw it in the faint tightening around his eyes. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say something that had nothing to do with Grant Keller. Something raw, something that might make them both impossible to return from. Instead, he stepped back. "Burn the invitation," he said. Avery lifted her chin. "Good night, Dominic." He looked at her for one last second, then turned and walked down the hallway. She closed the door. Only when the lock clicked did she realize her hand was shaking. Avery hated that. She hated fear when it dressed itself as anger. She hated that Dominic had a point. She hated that Grant Keller had reached into whatever fragile unnamed thing existed between her and Dominic and dragged it into the light for strangers to inspect. Most of all, she hated the invitation. It waited on the kitchen table like a dare. She picked it up again. "For the woman he thinks he owns." Avery turned the card over and over in her fingers. There had been a time when she was 16 and her father came home at sunrise with blood on his cuff. Not much, just a thumbprint near the button. She had seen it while he poured coffee with hands steady enough to frighten her. "What happened?" she asked. Samuel looked down at the stain, then at his daughter. "I stayed too long in a room where men forgot I could leave." That was all he said. Years later, Avery understood it as a warning. People did not always trap you with chains. Sometimes they trapped you with fear, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with love that asked for too much and called the asking devotion. She would not be trapped by Grant's manipulation. She would not be hidden by Dominic's fear. So she did not burn the invitation. The next morning, she went to work. The city did what cities always do. It moved on, indifferent to private storms. Buses hissed through slush. Office workers hurried over salted sidewalks. The river looked like dark steel beneath the bridges. Avery spent the day inside a historic theater on the south side inspecting water damage near the stage while her assistant complained about a contractor who had ordered the wrong wood. Normal life helped. For a few hours, she was not a target, not a name in Dominic Wolf's file, not a message written on the back of an invitation. She was just Avery Monroe standing beneath a cracked ceiling with dust in her hair and a flashlight in her hand. Then her phone rang. Samuel Monroe. She almost did not answer. Her father rarely called during work hours. When he did, his voice carried too much calm, which usually meant bad news had already arrived and chosen a chair. Avery stepped into the empty lobby. "Dad?" A pause. "You received an invitation," Samuel said. Not a question. Avery closed her eyes. "Hello to you too. Is everyone skipping greetings this week, Avery?" The way he said her name made her stomach tighten. "How do you know?" "Because Grant Keller does not move unless he wants someone to see the movement." "You know him." Another pause. "I knew men like him. That is not what I asked." Samuel sighed. For a moment, Avery heard his age. Not in his words, but in the space around them. "Yes," he said. "I know him." The lobby seemed to darken around her. "What does he want from me?" "Maybe nothing." "Dad. Maybe me." Avery gripped the phone harder. Samuel continued. "There are things from my old work that some men still believe exist. Do they?" Silence. That was answer enough. Avery looked toward the theater doors, where daylight cut through the dusty glass in pale rectangles. What kind of things? Records, patterns, connections no one wanted written down. "Did you write them down? I was paid to make men invisible. Sometimes the only way to stay alive was to keep proof that they had once been seen." Avery swallowed. All her life, Samuel's past had been a closed door. She had respected it because she loved him, because he had looked tired when the old names came up, because some questions feel cruel when asked of the people who raised you. But now his silence had found her anyway. "Is Dominic involved?" she asked. "Wolf was young when I left that life." "That is not an answer either." Samuel's voice hardened slightly. Dominic Wolfe is dangerous. I know. No, Avery. You know danger in theory. You know it through rooms and faces and the stories I should not have let you hear. Wolfe is not a story. Her temper sparked. And Grant Keller is worse in a different way. Wolfe draws lines. Keller erases them and calls it business. Avery looked down at her boots. Dust clung to the leather. Dominic told me not to go. Then perhaps listen. The words stung because they sounded too much like agreement between men who thought they knew better. You taught me not to let powerful people decide where I stand. I also taught you to leave rooms built to burn. Avery's throat tightened. Why does it feel like everyone knows more about my life than I do? Samuel did not answer quickly. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Because I tried to keep you outside the worst parts of mine. Avery wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. Instead, she felt the old ache of loving a parent who had protected her with silence, and in doing so, left her unprepared for the shape of the truth. I have to go, she said. Avery. What, if you attend that gala, do not drink anything you did not watch poured. Do not stand with your back to a private door. Do not trust a friendly woman too quickly, but do not ignore her if she looks frightened. And if Keller speaks about me, do not let him see where the words land. Her eyes burned. Those were not the warnings of a man who thought she could be kept away. They were the warnings of a father who knew she had already chosen. Okay, she whispered, and Avery, yes, if Dominic Wolfe is near you, remember this. A man can protect you from everyone in the room and still become the room you need to escape. The line stayed with her long after the call ended. That evening, Avery stood in front of her closet while the city darkened beyond her windows. The red gown hung from the door. She had bought it months ago for an event she never attended. Deep red satin, clean lines, no glitter, no sweetness. It did not beg for attention. It commanded it. Avery touched the fabric. She thought of Grant Keller's invitation. She thought of Dominic Wolfe standing in her hallway trying to turn fear into instruction. She thought of Samuel's voice heavy with history. Then she dressed. Not for Grant, not for Dominic, for herself. She pinned her hair low, left her throat bare, and placed the invitation in her black clutch. Her reflection looked back from the mirror calm and unfamiliar. Not fearless. Fearless women were either fools or liars. Avery was afraid. She simply refused to kneel to it. At 7:40, a car arrived outside her apartment. Not one of Dominic's. She had checked, twice. The driver opened the door without meeting her eyes. As the car pulled away from Lincoln Park, Avery watched the city slide past in streaks of gold and black. Restaurants glowed. Couples crossed icy streets. Steam rose from manholes. Somewhere behind all that ordinary life, men like Dominic Wolfe and Grant Keller moved money, loyalty, and violence through the dark veins of Chicago. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Dominic. Do not go. Avery stared at it. Then she typed back. Do not order me. His reply came 30 seconds later. Then let me ask. For some reason that hurt more. She did not answer. The Calder Hotel rose ahead, all glass stone and winter light. Black cars lined the curb. Men in tailored coats watched every arrival. Cameras turned silently above the entrance. The whole building seemed to breathe with money and menace. As the car stopped, Avery slipped her phone into her clutch. For one final second, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the night. Her father's past. Dominic's fear. Grant's trap. Her own stubborn heart beating like a warning beneath the red satin. Then the door opened. Cold air swept in. Avery Monroe stepped out beneath the lights of the Calder Hotel and walked toward the room where every smile had a price. The lobby swallowed Avery in gold light and polished marble. For one breath, she saw herself reflected in the glass doors behind her. Red satin, bare throat, calm eyes. A woman walking into danger as if she had been expected all her life. Then the doors closed and the city noise vanished. Inside the Calder Hotel, everything sounded expensive. The soft hush of silk gowns, the low murmur of powerful men pretending their conversations were innocent, the clean click of crystal glasses. Somewhere above the grand staircase, a string quartet played something slow and aching, a melody that made the room feel less like a celebration and more like a funeral with better lighting. Avery handed her coat to a young attendant whose hands trembled slightly when he saw the name on her invitation. That told her the staff had been warned. Not about every guest, about her. She gave him a small smile. Long night. He swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Then drink water when no one is looking. His mouth twitched before fear erased it. Thank you, ma'am. Avery turned toward the ballroom. Every instinct in her body sharpened. The Calder had been restored with perfect taste, too perfect. White marble columns, dark wood paneling, silver drapes pulled high from windows that looked down over Michigan Avenue. The chandeliers were so bright they made the champagne glow like captured fire, and yet beneath all that beauty, Avery could feel the hidden machinery of the night. Security near the exits. Men who never touched their drinks. Women laughing with their eyes fixed on someone else. A politician near the bar avoiding a man in a navy suit. A judge pretending not to notice the armed guard beside the service corridor. Samuel Monroe had taught her that dangerous rooms always had two designs. The one the architect drew, and the one power created after people moved in. Avery studied both. Then the room noticed her. It began at the edges. A few glances, then a pause in conversation, then the strange ripple that happens when people realize a story has just entered the room wearing red. Avery kept walking. She knew better than to slow down when people stared. If you hesitated, they decided you were waiting for permission. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, watched it poured from a fresh bottle before accepting it, then did not drink. She held it because empty hands made people think you were nervous. Near the far end of the ballroom, Grant Keller stood beneath a chandelier surrounded by donors and elected officials. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo and the smooth expression of a man who knew where every body was buried, even the ones still breathing. His eyes found Avery, not with surprise, with satisfaction. That made the air feel colder. Before Grant could move toward her, Avery felt another gaze from above. Dominic Wolfe stood on the mezzanine. Black suit, white shirt, no tie, still as a blade. Even at a distance, she could see the change in him when he saw her. It was not dramatic. Dominic did not perform emotion for rooms full of enemies. But his hand tightened around the lowball glass he held and his jaw turned hard enough to cut glass. Beside him, Ethan Cole leaned closer and said something Avery could not hear. Dominic did not answer. He only looked at her. Avery lifted her champagne glass slightly. Not a greeting, not an apology, a challenge. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Avery almost smiled. Almost. A woman appeared at her side before Grant could reach her. She was in her 40s, elegant in emerald silk with diamonds at her ears and tension carefully hidden beneath perfect makeup. Her dark hair was swept back, and her smile had been practiced for rooms where truth could become dangerous. "You must be Avery Monroe," she said. Avery turned. "That depends on who's asking." The woman's smile deepened. Vivian Pierce. For tonight, no one important. In this room, people only say that when they are very important or very trapped. Vivian's eyes flickered. Then she laughed softly, but the sound did not travel far. I see Samuel's daughter learned to listen between words. Avery's grip tightened on the champagne flute. You knew my father. I knew of him. Men like your father rarely introduced themselves unless there was a number attached. And yet you came over to introduce yourself. Vivian looked toward Grant. Because Mr. Keller is watching to see who approaches you first. Avery followed her glance. Grant had not moved, but his attention remained fixed on them. So you volunteered. I stepped in before someone worse did. That sounds almost kind. It isn't. I'm trying to survive the evening, same as you. Avery studied her. Vivian's posture was flawless, but her left thumb rubbed a small circle against the stem of her glass. A nervous habit. Controlled, but not gone. What does Grant have on you? Avery asked. Vivian's face did not change. Only her eyes did. Enough to make me careful. That is not an answer. It is the safest one. The music shifted. Laughter rose near the bar, too bright and too sudden. Avery saw two men turn away from each other with smiles that did not reach their faces. Vivian lowered her voice. Grant Keller does not invite people. He arranges them. Every place card, every drink, every introduction tonight serves a purpose. And my purpose. Vivian looked at the red gown, then at the mezzanine where Dominic stood. You already know. Avery refused to look up again. I know what men assume. Assumptions can still get you killed. Before Avery could respond, a waiter approached with a tray of small appetizers. Vivian took one untouched and placed it on a nearby table, as if she needed an excuse to pause. Do not let Grant get you alone, she said. Why warn me? Vivian's smile returned thinner now. Because I have watched enough women walk into private rooms thinking public manners would protect them. She drifted away before Avery could ask another question. For a moment, Avery stood alone beneath the chandelier surrounded by strangers who knew her name for reasons she did not yet understand. Then Grant Keller came toward her. The room made space for him without appearing to. Shoulders angled, conversations adjusted. Even men who disliked him seemed to respect the danger of blocking his path. He stopped in front of Avery and gave a slight bow of his head. Miss Monroe, Mr. Keller, Chicago looks better with you in it. Chicago usually says that right before it asks for something. His smile warmed, but his eyes sharpened. I was told you had your father's wit. People who say that usually mean his debts. Samuel was a complicated man. He is still alive, so you can use present tense. A faint pause. Good, Avery thought. Let him know there were lines. Grant accepted a glass from a waiter, though Avery noticed he did not drink from it. I meant only that your father's legacy is complicated. Legacy is what people call your past when they want to use it against your family. Grant looked delighted. Dominic Wolfe warned you about me. You assume I needed warning. I assume Dominic does not warn unless he is afraid. Avery brought the champagne near her lips, but did not sip. Dominic Wolfe does not strike me as a frightened man. No. Grant glanced upward. Avery did not follow his gaze. Grant leaned just a little closer, close enough for his cologne to cut through the scent of flowers and wine. Fear looks different on men like Wolfe. It does not shake. It calculates. And what does it look like on you? Grant's smile turned almost tender. On me, Miss Monroe, fear looks like opportunity. Avery let the silence sit between them. Men like Grant hated silence unless they controlled it. He recovered smoothly. I hope you will enjoy the auction tonight. The final item may interest you. I do not collect things I cannot afford. Everyone can afford something. Money is only one currency. There it is. His brows lifted. There, what is the part where charm gets bored and starts showing teeth. Grant laughed, and several nearby guests glanced over as if the sound itself gave them permission to relax. Avery did not. Grant tilted his glass toward her. "Enjoy the evening, Avery." Her name sounded wrong in his mouth. Too familiar, too intentional. He walked away, leaving behind the faint impression of a door closing. Avery exhaled only when he reached another group of guests. Then Dominic was beside her. He did not touch her. He did not greet her like a lover or an owner or a man with a right to stand too close. He simply appeared, and the air changed. "Did he threaten you?" Dominic asked. Avery kept her eyes on the room. "Is that what greetings sound like in your world? Answer me." She turned her head slowly. "Careful." Dominic looked down at her. For a second, the ballroom faded into the pressure between them. "Careful," he said. That sounded like an order. His eyes flashed, not with anger alone, with worry trying to wear anger's coat. What did he say? "He called my father complicated. He called your fear an opportunity. Then he told me to enjoy the auction." Dominic's gaze cut toward Grant. Avery saw the room react before Dominic moved. A man near the bar stopped mid-sentence. A councilwoman looked away. One of Grant's guards shifted his weight. That was Dominic's power. He did not have to raise his voice. The room heard him anyway. Avery stepped slightly into his line of sight. Dominic looked back at her. "No," she said quietly. His expression hardened. "No, what?" "No, you do not get to turn me into the fuse. I am trying to keep him away from you, and I am standing in a ballroom, not lying on train tracks. You think this is funny? I think if you wanted me to trust your judgment, you should stop sounding like every man my father taught me to survive." That landed. Dominic's face closed, but not before she saw the flicker beneath it. "You came here to prove something," he said. Avery's voice softened, though her spine stayed straight. "I came because Grant wanted me afraid, and you wanted me hidden." Dominic stepped half an inch closer. "I wanted you safe. Then learn the difference." Ethan appeared at Dominic's shoulder, saving them both from whatever might have been said next. His eyes moved from Avery to Dominic, then back to Avery. "Miss Monroe," Ethan said, "you look very difficult to protect tonight." Avery almost laughed. "That is the nicest thing anyone has said to me so far." Dominic did not look amused. Ethan lowered his voice. "We found something." Dominic's attention sharpened. Avery noticed the shift at once. "If this is about me, say it in front of me." Dominic looked at Ethan. Ethan looked like a man choosing between two kinds of danger. "The file leak," Ethan said. "It was not an outside breach. Someone with internal access pulled it." Dominic went still. Nothing in his face changed enough for the room to read. But Avery felt the cold roll off him. "Who?" Dominic asked. "Not confirmed yet." "Then confirm it. I'm working on it." Avery watched them, pieces falling into place. "So Grant has someone inside your organization?" Dominic did not answer. She hated that his silence was an answer. "And my name was in the file that person stole," she said. Ethan's eyes lowered for a brief second. Dominic's voice was low. "Avery, no. I want to understand the shape of the room I'm standing in. You are standing in a room full of men who will use anything they can reach. Then stop making me the thing they can reach without telling me how close their hands are." The words came sharper than she intended. Dominic absorbed them without looking away. Before he could speak, the lights dimmed slightly. A pleasant chime sounded through the ballroom. Grant Keller walked onto the raised stage at the front of the room. Applause began at once, polished and obedient. The kind of applause people gave when they wanted to be seen giving it. Dominic did not move from Avery's side. Grant took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on such a cold Chicago evening in support of the Calder Winter Foundation. His voice was smooth, rich, trained for trust. Avery watched his hands. Men lied with their mouths, first hand second. Grant's hands were calm. Too calm. He spoke about preservation, community investment, forgotten neighborhoods, the dignity of restoring what time had damaged. Avery almost admired the performance. He knew the right words. He knew how to make greed sound like charity. Then the auction began. A weekend at a private lodge in Aspen. A rare watch donated by a retired senator. A dinner prepared by a celebrity chef. A painting from a collector who looked half asleep until bidding started. The room warmed with competition. Numbers rose. People laughed. Couples touched arms. Grant guided the energy, beautifully drawing bids higher with a smile and a pause. Avery stood near the edge of the crowd, aware of Dominic beside her and Ethan just behind them. She did not ask why Dominic stayed. She knew. So did everyone else. That was the problem. Grant knew exactly where to look after each item sold. Not at the highest bidder. At Dominic. At Avery. By the fifth item, Avery understood the real auction had nothing to do with what was on stage. Grant was measuring reactions. Whose eyes went where? Who hesitated before raising a paddle? Who checked with whom before spending money? Samuel's old lesson whispered through her mind. Watch the man everyone checks before they speak. Tonight, half the room checked Dominic. The other half was learning to check Grant. When the sixth item closed, Vivian Pierce reappeared near Avery, this time without looking directly at her. Do not bid on the final item, Vivian said softly. Avery kept her gaze on the stage. Why? Because it was chosen for you. Avery's pulse changed. Dominic heard. Of course he did. What final item, he asked. Vivian's face went pale at the sound of his voice, but she recovered with practiced grace. Mr. Wolfe. Vivian. There was history there. Not intimacy. Recognition. Vivian looked at Avery. I am sorry, for what Avery asked. The stage lights shifted. Grant returned to the microphone with a smile that made the back of Avery's neck prickle. And now, he said, our final item of the evening is one close to my heart, and perhaps close to the heart of this city. Two staff members carried a covered glass case onto the stage. Avery felt Dominic's attention sharpen beside her. The cover was lifted. Inside stood a perfect architectural model of an old Chicago hotel. Cream stone facade, arched windows, tiny brass doors, a rooftop garden. The room applauded softly. Avery did not move. She knew that building, not because she had restored it, not because she had studied it in school, because a sketch of that exact facade had once been hidden inside Samuel Monroe's locked desk drawer. She had seen it when she was 17 by accident while looking for her birth certificate. Her father had taken it from her hand too quickly and told her it was from an old job. His face had been gray. Grant's voice flowed over the room. This model represents the original design concept for the Ashbury Hotel, a building lost to fire before its restoration could ever begin. Some structures survive neglect. Others survive corruption. And some, no matter how carefully they are built, collapse when their foundations are examined. Avery's mouth went dry. Dominic leaned toward her. Do you know it? She did not answer. Grant looked directly at her from the stage. The Ashbury was designed with hidden service corridors, private vault spaces, and financial backing from some of Chicago's most colorful historical figures. Tonight, we honor not only the building, but the secrets every great city hides beneath its stone. Avery heard her father's voice through the phone. Records, patterns, connections no one wanted written down. Dominic's voice was barely audible. "Avery, my father had drawings of that hotel," she whispered. Dominic's face turned lethal. Grant opened the bidding. The first bid came from an old man near the front, then another from a woman Avery recognized from a development firm. Numbers climbed fast, but Avery barely heard them. She was looking at the model, at the tiny brass doors, at the row of small windows along the base. Not windows, she realized. Markers. Her father had taught her enough about architectural drawings to see when something was decorative and when something was code. The windows were spaced wrong, not for design, for sequence. Avery stepped closer without meaning to. Dominic moved with her, Grant saw. His smile deepened. The bidding reached $50,000. Then Dominic raised his paddle. The room went quiet before the auctioneer even named his bid. $100,000 from Mr. Wolfe. Avery turned on him. "What are you doing buying it?" "No." Dominic did not look at her. "Yes." "Dominic." He lowered his voice. "If that model connects to your father, it does not leave this room with Keller's friends. And if he wanted you to react, then he got what he wanted." Avery stared at him. That honesty startled her more than denial would have. Grant watched them from the stage like a man enjoying music. Another bidder raised to $150,000. Dominic raised to $200,000. Avery felt the entire room feeding on the moment. The tension, the visible fracture, the woman in red whispering urgently to the man in black. Grant had not just put the model up for auction, he had put Dominic's control on display. Avery reached out and placed her hand over Dominic's paddle. The contact burned through them both. "Stop," she said. His eyes dropped to her hand, then lifted to her face. The room around them blurred. "You don't know what it is," he said. "Neither do you. That is why I need it." "No, that is why we need to think." The auctioneer called for the next bid. Dominic's fingers flexed beneath her hand, but he did not raise the paddle. Avery saw the war in him. Every instinct told him to seize, secure, possess the threat before it could hurt her. Every part of him had been built for that kind of survival. But he looked at her hand on his, and he stopped. The model sold to a man Avery did not know. Grant applauded with the room. Avery removed her hand from Dominic's, though the warmth of it stayed in her palm. Dominic turned to Ethan. "Find out who bought it." Ethan was already moving. Avery watched Grant step down from the stage and disappear through a side door with the ease of a man who knew she would follow the questions he had left behind. The ballroom filled again with music and conversation, but nothing felt festive now. The night had changed shape. Grant had reached past Avery's pride, past Dominic's fear, straight into Samuel Monroe's buried past. Vivian brushed past Avery one last time, close enough to whisper, "The East Corridor has the old photographs, if you want to understand why he chose the Ashbury start there." Avery turned, but Vivian was already gone. Dominic followed her gaze. "What did she say?" Avery looked toward the side corridor where Grant had vanished, where the music thinned and the light turned cooler. "She told me where to look." Dominic's expression darkened. "You are not going alone." Avery met his eyes. "Then do not stand in front of me." She walked away from the ballroom before he could answer toward the quiet corridor, where the hotel's polished history waited on the walls like a row of beautiful lies. Avery left the music behind one step at a time. The ballroom did not disappear all at once. It faded in layers. First, the laughter thinned. Then the clinking glasses softened. Then the string quartet became nothing more than a trembling note somewhere behind the walls. By the time she reached the East Corridor, the Gala sounded like another life. The hallway was colder than the ballroom. Not physically, not entirely. The Calder Hotel would never allow its guests to feel real discomfort. But the light changed here. It slipped from gold to silver, from celebration to memory. Framed photographs lined the walls, each one lit from above by small brass lamps. Old Chicago streets, men in wool coats, construction crews standing beside iron beams. The Calder, in its earliest days, proud and unfinished, surrounded by mud horses and ambition. Avery slowed. Her heels made soft sounds on the polished floor. Behind her, Dominic followed at a measured distance. He had listened. He was not beside her, not in front of her, not blocking her path. That should not have mattered as much as it did. Avery stopped at the first photograph. Workers stood outside the hotel in the winter of 1928, their faces blurred by time. The next showed the ballroom before, chandeliers, just scaffolding and exposed ceiling beams. The third showed a group of investors in dark coats on the hotel steps. Avery scanned every face. Nothing. She moved to the next frame and forgot to breathe. Her father stood near the edge of the photograph. Not the father she knew, not the older man with the silver at his temples and tired kindness in his eyes. This Samuel Monroe was young, lean, and unsmiling. He wore a dark suit and held a leather folder under one arm. Beside him stood three men Avery recognized from newspaper archives, men described as developers, philanthropists, civic leaders. Liars, probably. At the center of the photograph was a younger man with a Keller jawline. Grant's father or uncle. Blood had a way of repeating its architecture. Avery stepped closer until her reflection faintly overlapped the glass. Her face hovered over Samuel's daughter, and father separated by decades and secrets. Dominic's voice came from behind her low. "Is that him?" Yes. She hated how small the word sounded. Dominic came no closer. How old was he? Younger than I am now. Her throat tightened. All her life, her father's past had lived in locked drawers, careful pauses and phone calls he took in other rooms. She had built a version of him she could understand. A man who had made mistakes. A man who had left them. A man who had saved what he could of himself. But this photograph showed him inside the machine. Not near it. Not outside it. Inside. A door opened somewhere at the far end of the corridor. Avery turned. Grant Keller stepped out of a private room with a glass in one hand and no surprise on his face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. Dominic's presence changed instantly. The air tightened around him. Grant noticed and smiled. "I was speaking of the photograph, Wolf. Though I understand your confusion." Avery did not move. Grant walked toward them slowly, his shoes silent on the carpet runner. He looked perfectly at ease, as if he had simply wandered away from his own party to admire hotel history. But Avery knew better now. "You arranged this hallway," she said. Grant's smile widened. "I arranged the evening." Dominic's voice cut in calm and deadly. "You should return to your guests." "I will." But Miss Monroe came looking for answers. Avery looked at Dominic, then back at Grant. "I can speak for myself." Grant tipped his glass slightly. "That I never doubted." Dominic's eyes stayed on Grant. "Say what you brought her here to hear." Grant studied him with faint amusement. "There is that famous efficiency. No patience for theater unless it belongs to you." Avery stepped away from the photograph. "Talk to me, Grant, not around me." For the first time, something like approval crossed his face. "Your father was gifted," he said. "Not merely with numbers. Anyone can hide money badly. Samuel Monroe could make money vanish in ways that looked like architecture. Restoration trusts. Preservation grants, municipal repair funds, shell donors attached to dead buildings. He built financial rooms inside real ones." Avery felt the words strike one by one. Dominic remained silent behind her, but she could feel his focus sharpen. "My father left that life," Avery said. "Yes, Grant replied. Eventually. Men often discover morality after they have made enough money to afford it. Her anger came quick and clean. Be careful. Grant gave her a small bow of his head. There she is. Avery hated that he enjoyed the reaction. She forced herself still. Grant moved to the photograph and tapped the glass near Samuel's younger face. The Ashbury Hotel was supposed to be the crown jewel, a private vault beneath a public landmark. Money passed through the construction budget, then through restoration projections, then into accounts no one could touch without the right sequence. What sequence? Grant looked at her. Your father's. Avery shook her head once. I do not know anything about that. I believe you. That surprised her more than disbelief would have. Grant's voice softened. I believe Samuel loved you enough to keep you ignorant. Unfortunately, love does not erase inheritance. Dominic stepped forward one pace. Grant's guards appeared at the far end of the corridor. 2 men, then 3. Ethan appeared behind them, almost at the same time, quiet as smoke, with 2 of Dominic's men spreading out near the service entrance. The hallway became a held breath. Grant looked past Avery to Dominic. Always so dramatic. Dominic did not blink. Move your men, after you move yours. Avery looked between them and felt fury rise in her chest. Men arranging violence around her body as if she were furniture in a room they owned. No. The word cracked through the corridor. Both men looked at her. Avery's voice stayed low. No one moves until I say this conversation is over. Grant seemed entertained. Dominic did not. Avery, he said. She turned on him. Do not. His jaw locked. She faced Grant again. You invited me because you think I can unlock something. Grant nodded. In part. What is the other part? His gaze drifted toward Dominic. To see whether Chicago's most controlled man would lose control when someone touched what he keeps closest. Avery's stomach tightened. Dominic's eyes went colder. Grant reached inside his jacket. Dominic moved so fast the nearest guard flinched. Grant paused, smiling, and slowly withdrew a folded sheet of paper. Relax. It is only paper, though in my experience paper has destroyed more men than bullets. He offered it to Avery. Dominic's voice was ice. Do not take that. Avery took it. Dominic went still. She unfolded the page. At the top, in clean black type, were her name, her address, her work history, and several recent locations. Beneath that, a line of text made the hallway tilt beneath her feet. Avery Monroe, personal priority. Protect at all costs. She read it twice, then a third time. The words should have made her feel safer. They did not. They made her feel catalogued, reduced, contained inside someone else's fear. Grant's voice lowered. That is how Dominic Wolfe loves. He identifies a threat. He secures the asset. He locks the room and calls it devotion. Avery looked down at the paper. Dominic said nothing. That was the worst part. He did not deny it quickly enough. Grant continued each word placed with surgical care. You are not his partner. You are his breach point. His liability. His beautiful little emergency. Avery lifted her eyes to him. And what am I to you? Grant's smile thinned. A key. At least you are honest. I told you I would be. No, she said, you are just uglier with better lighting. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. There. Avery held on to it. Dominic's voice came quietly from behind her. You have made your point, Keller. Grant looked over her shoulder. No. I have made yours. Avery turned then. Dominic stood a few feet away, carved from restraint and fury. His hands were empty, but every man in the corridor watched them. His eyes were on the paper in her hand, and for the first time that night, Avery saw something other than anger. Shame. Not enough to break him, enough to show. Grant noticed, too. He smiled, satisfied. Ask him, Avery. Ask him why your name was first. Ask him what else he keeps locked away. Dominic's gaze moved to Grant. Leave. Grant stepped back, lifting his glass. Gladly. He passed Avery slowly close enough to speak without the others hearing. Your father knew where the bodies were buried because he built the accounts that paid for the shovels. When you want the truth, come without your wolf. Avery did not answer. Grant walked away with his guards melting after him. Ethan's men did not stop them. Nobody wanted blood in a hallway full of cameras and donors. When the door at the far end closed, the silence he left behind felt louder than the Gala. Ethan looked at Dominic. Dominic did not look back. Clear the corridor, he said. Ethan hesitated only a second before nodding. The men withdrew, spreading out beyond the hallway, leaving Avery and Dominic alone beneath the old photographs. Avery still held the paper. Dominic's voice was quiet. I should have told you. She laughed once without humor. That is where you want to start. His face tightened. No, but it is the first true thing. Avery looked at the line again. Protect at all costs. At all costs, she said. Whose cost, Dominic? He did not answer quickly. Good. She did not want reflex. She wanted truth. Yours, if necessary, he said. Mine, certainly. Anyone who tried to hurt you. And mine. His eyes lifted to hers. There it was. The question he did not want to face. Avery stepped closer, holding the page between them. Would you have locked me away tonight if you could? His silence told the truth before his mouth did. Yes, he said. The honesty hit her harder than a lie. She swallowed. Because you think I am weak? No. Because you think I am foolish? No. Then why Dominic looked past her for a moment toward the photograph of her father, toward the dead men and the old hotel and all the rot dressed up as history. When I was 27, he said I had a cousin named Michael. He was the only person in my family who wanted nothing from this life. I kept him far from everything. No meetings, no money, no favors. I thought distance would protect him. Avery's anger did not leave, but it slowed. Dominic's voice stayed controlled. That almost made it worse. One of my enemies found him anyway. Not because Michael mattered to the business, because he mattered to me. By the time I learned he had been taken, he was already dead. The corridor seemed to narrow. I made lists after that, Dominic said. Names, patterns, weak points, anyone close enough to be used. I told myself information was protection, and I became a name on that list. You became the first name. Avery looked down. The words blurred for a second, but she refused to let tears come. Not here, not beneath these lights, not with her father's young face watching from the wall. I am not your penance, she said. No, I am not Michael. No, I am not a locked room you get to build because grief taught you bad lessons. Dominic flinched. Barely. But she saw it. I know, he said. Do you? His voice roughened. I am trying to. That undid something in her, and she hated him a little for it. Avery folded the page carefully because tearing it would feel too easy. Grant said you do not love people. You secure assets. Dominic's eyes darkened. What do you think he asked? I think he knows which lies are close enough to truth to hurt. Dominic looked away first. The gesture was small, but it felt like a confession. Avery stepped nearer, close enough now to see the faint scar along his left hand pale against his skin. You told me I was a target, she said. You never told me I was your weakness. His gaze snapped back to her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Dominic said, You are. The words were quiet. They struck like a gunshot. Avery's heart moved painfully in her chest. Dominic continued each sentence pulled from somewhere he kept buried. Not because you are fragile, because when Keller looks at you, I forget strategy. When you walk into danger, every rule I live by starts breaking in my hands. When you argue with me, I want to stop you and listen to you at the same time. When you leave a room, I count the exits after you. Avery could barely breathe. That is not healthy, she whispered. No, that is not fair to me. No, and it is not love if it turns me into something you manage. Dominic stepped closer, then stopped himself before his body crossed the space she had not offered. His restraint was visible. Painful. Then tell me where to stand, he said. Avery blinked. What? Tell me where protection ends and control begins. The question was so simple, so impossible. He looked at her as if the answer mattered more than pride, more than power, more than being right. I do not know how to do this cleanly, he said. Everything I have ever kept safe, I kept through control. Territory, money, men, roots, silence. But you are not territory, you are not silence, and I am trying to learn that before I destroy the only thing I wanted without planning to. Avery's anger shook inside her, but beneath it was something worse. Hope. Hope was dangerous in rooms like this. She looked toward the ballroom where the music had started again, faint and elegant. Life continuing because nobody cared what had just cracked open in the corridor. I need time, she said. Dominic nodded once. The speed of it surprised her. No argument, no demand, no step closer. Take it. Avery searched his face. You hate that. Yes. Good. Something almost like a smile moved through his eyes, then vanished. She held out the folded paper. Keep your file. He did not take it. No, he said. Destroy it if you want. Avery looked at the page in her hand. Then she walked to a small brass ashtray near a side table, took a candle from beside a floral arrangement, and held the corner of the paper to the flame. Dominic watched without speaking as the fire caught. The words curled black first. Personal priority. Protect at all costs. Avery dropped the burning paper into the ashtray and watched it become ash. Only then did she look at him again. I am leaving, she said. Dominic's jaw tightened. Let Ethan take you. No, Avery. She lifted one hand. He stopped. Not because he agreed, because she asked him to stop without saying the word. I came here on my own, she said. I leave on my own. Every instinct in him rebelled. She saw it. The tension in his shoulders, the stillness in his hands, the war behind his eyes. But he said, all right. Avery did not thank him. It was not a gift. It was a boundary. She turned and walked toward the east exit. The hallway seemed longer on the way back. The photographs watched her pass. Her father's younger face disappeared behind her. The ballroom opened to her left, still bright, still laughing, still pretending nothing in the hotel had teeth. Avery did not look for Grant. She did not look for Vivian. She crossed the lobby, returned the untouched champagne glass to a waiter's tray, and headed toward the side entrance where her car was supposed to wait. The cold hit her before the door opened fully. A uniformed driver stood beside a black sedan under the awning. Avery slowed. The car was not the one that had brought her. The driver smiled. Miss Monroe. His voice was polite. Too polite. Avery looked at his cuffs. On the left one, a small silver wolf pin had been turned upside down. Mockery. Or message. Her father's voice moved through her memory as if he stood beside her. Never watch the door they open for you. Watch the door they hope you ignore. Avery smiled at the driver. 1 second, I forgot my wrap. She turned before he could answer and walked back into the lobby at the same calm pace. Not fast, never fast. Panic announced itself before danger needed help. Near the coat room, a server passed with a tray of empty crystal flutes. Avery stepped into his path and let her clutch fall. He moved to avoid it. The tray tilted. Glass shattered across the marble in a violent silver crash. Every head in the lobby turned. Security shifted. The driver at the door looked in. Avery moved, not toward the ballroom. Toward the service corridor Vivian had used earlier. A man stepped out from beside the coat room, blocking her path. Big shoulders, blank face. Not hotel security. "Miss Monroe," he said. "This way." Avery looked past him as if confused. Then she drove the sharp heel of her shoe onto his instep. He grunted, folding just enough. She slipped around him and pushed through the service door. Behind her, someone cursed. Avery ran now. The corridor smelled of steam metal and lemon cleaner. Kitchen noise burst around her. Cooks shouted. Plates clattered. A dishwasher looked up as she passed in red satin like some strange disaster moving through the back of the hotel. She saw the west stairwell sign. A hand caught her wrist. She twisted hard, ready to scream. Ethan Cole released her immediately and raised both hands. "Easy," he said. "It is me." Avery's heart slammed against her ribs. "You scared me. You scared half the hotel. Good." Ethan looked over her shoulder. "Did you see the driver?" "Yes." "Did you get in the car?" "Do I look like I got in the car?" His mouth twitched. "No, Miss Monroe. You look like you ruined somebody's plan and possibly a server's evening." Footsteps sounded at the far end of the service corridor. Ethan's humor vanished. "This way." Avery hesitated. He saw it and understood. "I am not taking you to Dominic. I am taking you to an exit that does not belong to Grant." That was the right answer. Avery followed him down the stairwell, her hand sliding along the cold rail breath still too fast. They emerged behind the hotel near the loading dock where snow fell heavier, and the city smelled of exhaust and winter. A dark SUV waited with no lights on. Ethan opened the rear door, then stepped back. "Your choice," he said. Avery looked at him. He had learned from Dominic's mistake faster than Dominic had. She almost smiled. Then she got in. The SUV pulled away through the alley, leaving the Calder's golden windows behind. Inside, Avery pressed her hand against the door and tried to steady her breathing. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. "Are you safe?" She stared at it for several seconds. Then she typed, "I got myself out." His reply came almost immediately. "I know." Avery leaned back as Chicago slid past in streaks of black glass white snow and red brake lights. Inside the Calder Hotel, Dominic stood alone in the security room watching the recording of Avery turning away from the false driver before anyone else in the lobby understood the danger. Ethan's voice came through his earpiece. "She is clear." Dominic closed his eyes for 1 second. Only one. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A photo appeared on the screen. Samuel Monroe's old ledger lay open on a dark wooden table. Beside it sat the Ashbury model from the auction. Below the image, Grant had written a single line. "She walks away tonight. Your secrets do not." Grant's message stayed on Dominic's screen long after the photo disappeared into black. For several seconds, Dominic did not move. The security room beneath the Calder Hotel hummed with monitors, cables, and the low mechanical breath of hidden systems. On one screen, guests still danced beneath chandeliers. On another, Grant Keller laughed beside a senator's wife as if he had not just tried to put Avery Monroe into the wrong car. On a third, the east entrance replayed in silence, showing Avery stopping, noticing, thinking, surviving. Dominic watched that part twice. Not because he doubted her. Because the sight of her choosing the right door before anyone reached her did something painful inside him. He had built his whole life around preventing disaster before it touched what mattered. He knew how to stop men close accounts move guns, bury threats. But Avery had not waited to be moved. She had read the trap, broken the rhythm, and walked herself out. Ethan entered the room, snow melting on the shoulders of his coat. "She is home," he said. Dominic did not turn. "You saw her inside. I watched her enter the building. She checked the street first, then the lobby, then me from the reflection in the glass." Dominic looked at him. Ethan shrugged. "She is hard to protect." Dominic's gaze returned to the screen. "Good." Ethan studied him for a moment as if deciding whether the word meant progress or damage. "Grant has the ledger," Ethan said. "He has a photograph of a ledger. You think it is fake? I think if he had everything, he would not need her." The room fell quiet. On the monitor, Avery, in red satin, moved through the service corridor, one hand lifting the hem of her gown, the other clenched around her clutch. She looked terrified for half a breath, then focused, then furious. Dominic touched the edge of the desk with 2 fingers. "Find the man who bought the model." "Already done." "Name is Peter Langford, real estate attorney. Represents 3 Keller accounts and 1 foundation board member. Bring me his financials." Ethan nodded, then hesitated. Dominic noticed. "Say it. You cannot move on Keller like this is only about him." Dominic turned slowly. Ethan did not back down. That was why Dominic kept him close. "This is about the leak, too," Ethan continued. "Someone inside gave Keller a private file. If you go hunting with your temper showing, the mole disappears." Dominic's voice stayed flat. "My temper is not showing." "No, that is usually when I worry." For a long moment they looked at each other. Then Dominic slipped his phone into his pocket. "Get me the leak." Quietly. "And Avery." Dominic looked toward the monitor again, but Avery was gone now. Only an empty service hallway remained. She asked for space. Ethan waited. Dominic's jaw tightened. "So I will give it to her." At sunrise, Avery woke to silence. She lay still, staring at the ceiling of her apartment while the pale blue light of winter morning crept around the edges of the curtains. For a few seconds, she did not remember the gala. She only felt the strange weight in her body, the exhaustion that came after fear had nowhere left to run. Then everything returned. The red gown, the photographs, Grant's voice in the corridor, Dominic's file, the false driver, the crash of glass against marble. Avery sat up. Her apartment looked untouched, books stacked on the coffee table, a half-dead fern near the window, her boots by the door still dusted with melted snow. Normal things, safe things. She got out of bed and walked to the window. No black SUV waited at the curb. No man stood beneath the bookstore awning pretending to check his phone. No guard leaned against a parked car. Avery checked the street twice. Nothing. That absence hit her harder than surveillance would have. She wrapped herself in a robe and opened her apartment door. A cream envelope lay on the floor. Her name was written across the front in Dominic's handwriting. She picked it up slowly, carried it to the kitchen, and opened it beside the coffee maker. Inside was a single note. "You asked for space. I am giving it. If you need me, call. If you do not, I will keep my distance. D." Avery read it once, then again. The words were simple, but she knew the cost behind them. Dominic Wolfe did not give distance easily. He gave orders, money, warnings, consequences. Distance, real distance, was not his natural language. Her thumb brushed the edge of the paper. Against her better judgment, she smiled. Not because everything was fixed, because for the first time he had let discomfort belong to him instead of turning it into a cage around her. Her phone rang before she could fold the note. Her father. Avery answered on the second ring. "I am alive," she said. Samuel exhaled like he had been holding his breath for hours. I know. How, because if you were not, the city would sound different. Avery closed her eyes. That is a horrible answer. It is an honest one. She leaned against the counter. Grant has something of yours. Silence. Dad, what did you see? A photograph of a ledger. The Ashbury model. He said you built financial rooms inside real ones. He said I inherited the key. Samuel's breathing changed. Avery gripped the counter harder. Is he lying? No. The answer hollowed out the room. She stared at the note from Dominic lying open on the counter, his promise of distance beside her father's confession of secrets. What did you do? She asked. Samuel's voice came back low. I kept records that could ruin men who were already ruining everyone else. And you hid them in buildings, in restoration accounts, drawings, foundation documents, some in models, some in permits, some in numbers only. I understood. Only you. Another pause. Avery understood before he spoke. No, Samuel said, not only me. Her laugh came out thin. You taught me. I taught you patterns. You taught me how to read your patterns. I taught my daughter how to survive. You taught me how to unlock a war. Samuel had no answer for that. Avery looked toward the window. Snow had begun again, soft and steady against the glass. Does Grant have enough to use? He has enough to threaten, not enough to control the whole thing. What does he need you? The words settled between them. Avery felt no surprise this time. Only a cold kind of clarity. Then I need to know everything. No. Her voice hardened. Do not do that. Avery, these records touch men who have killed for less than embarrassment. I was almost taken from a hotel last night. Samuel went silent. She kept going, each word clean and steady. I am already in it. You do not get to protect me with ignorance anymore. Dominic tried that. It did not work for him either. At Dominic's name, Samuel sighed. You trust him. Avery looked at the note again. I trust that he is trying to become someone I can trust. That is not the same thing, no, she said. But it is more than most men offer. That evening, Avery chose the restaurant. It was small, narrow, and crowded, tucked beside the Chicago River, where the windows fogged from kitchen heat and winter breath. Not one of Dominic's places. Not polished enough for men who liked to pretend crime had table manners. Avery arrived first. She sat with her back to the wall because Samuel had raised her well and ordered coffee because wine felt too soft for the conversation ahead. Dominic entered at 7 exactly. Alone. No Ethan. No visible guards. No black-suited men near the door. He wore a charcoal coat over a dark suit, and for once he looked less like a man arriving to own the room than one asking permission to enter it. Avery watched him approach. He stopped beside the table. May I sit? The question was so careful it almost hurt. Avery nodded. You may. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, headlights slid over the river. Inside, forks tapped plates, a waiter laughed near the bar, and a couple at the next table argued softly over dessert. Avery took the note from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. Dominic looked at it. Thank you, she said. His eyes lifted to hers. You should not have to thank me for respecting a boundary. No. But I know you hated it. Yes. Good. Sit with that. His mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. I have been. The waiter came. Avery ordered coffee. Dominic ordered the same. She raised an eyebrow. You hate coffee this late. I hate many things. I am adapting. This time she did smile. Only for a second. Then she leaned forward. I have rules. Dominic did not flinch. Say them. No tracking my phone. Agreed. No guards outside my apartment unless I ask. His jaw tightened. Avery waited. Agreed, he said. No decisions made for my own good without telling me. Agreed. No private files on me. I destroyed the copies I controlled this afternoon. Avery searched his face. And the ones stolen, I am getting them back. That sounded like an answer and not an answer. It is the only true one I have tonight. Fair, she continued. No secrets that put me in danger. Dominic looked down at his coffee as the waiter set it between them. That one may be harder. Avery's expression cooled. Dominic lifted his hand slightly. Not because I want to keep them. Because my life is built from secrets and some of them belong to people who can bleed. Then learn the difference between privacy and danger. He looked at her for a long moment. Agreed. Avery sat back. Dominic wrapped one hand around the coffee cup but did not drink. I have one rule, he said. Her eyes narrowed. One. If you leave because you choose to. Not to punish me. Not because Keller manipulates you. Not because fear convinces you that distance is the same as freedom. Avery felt the words land in a tender place. She hated that he could still find those. That sounds dangerously close to asking me not to run. No, Dominic said. It is asking you to know why you are running. She looked out at the river. A boat moved slowly through the black water, its lights shaking in the current. Fair, she said. Only then did Dominic take out his phone. He placed it on the table and turned the screen toward her. The photo Grant had sent filled the glass. Samuel's ledger, the Ashbury model. Avery stared at it. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. Clean, narrow, slightly tilted. She had seen it on grocery lists, birthday cards, school forms, and notes taped to the fridge. Seeing it beside Grant's threat made her feel as if two versions of her childhood had collided in public. Dominic watched her carefully. Not controlling. Watching. Avery zoomed in on the page. Numbers, building references, initials, dates. At first it looked like accounting. Then her mind shifted the way it did when reading old architectural plans. She stopped looking at the numbers as amounts and started seeing them as positions. Those are not totals, she said. Dominic leaned in. They are room numbers. His eyes sharpened. You are sure? Look here, 1208. That could be an amount, but beside Ashbury it means 12th floor, room 8. Then 315. 3rd floor, room 15. The sequence is not financial, it is spatial. Dominic's gaze moved over the image. Avery tapped the screen. The model has markers along the base. I saw them during the auction. They looked decorative, but they were spaced wrong. They match entries like these. He needs you to read it. He needs someone who thinks like my father. Dominic's voice was quiet. Can you? Avery looked at him. There it was again, the old danger, the chance for him to take the problem from her hands. But he did not. He asked. She looked back at the photo. Yes, she said, I can. They worked until the restaurant emptied around them. Avery drew patterns on napkins. Dominic made calls in a voice so low even the waiter stopped trying to listen. Samuel sent 3 old photographs after Avery demanded proof instead of apologies. Ethan found the buyer of the model and traced him through 2 law firms, 1 foundation, and a development trust tied to Grant. By midnight, Avery had decoded enough to understand the shape of the trap. The Ashbury was not just a hotel, it had been a vault. Money moved through fake restoration budgets, then through a foundation that still existed under a different name. The Calder Winter Foundation. Grant's charity. Avery sat back slowly, the final napkin covered in numbers before her. He is not using the foundation to look clean, she said. Dominic's eyes were dark. He is using clean money to expand dirty power. And my father's old system is the map. Dominic looked toward the window, then back at her. We can take him apart with this. Avery noticed the word. We, not I. She let him have it. The mole surfaced 2 days later. His name was Caleb Rourke, a mid-level advisor inside one of Dominic's logistics companies. Married, 2 children, a brother with gambling debt in Cicero. He had sold access to Grant after Grant's men threatened to put the brother in the river. Ethan delivered the file in Dominic's penthouse office. Avery stood near the window looking down at the city. She had not planned to be there when Ethan came in, but Dominic did not send her away. That mattered. Caleb sat in a chair across from Dominic's desk, pale, and shaking hands cuffed in front of him. He looked younger than Avery expected. Not innocent, just terrified. Dominic stood behind the desk silent. That silence was worse than shouting. Caleb kept talking. I did not know what was in the file. I swear. They said it was account data. I thought it was business contacts. Dominic's voice was flat. You opened a door. They had my brother. You opened my door. Caleb began to cry. Avery watched Dominic's face and saw the old machine turning inside him. Fear into punishment. Betrayal into blood. A message sent to every man who might think of selling him again. Dominic moved around the desk. Avery spoke before he reached Caleb. Will hurting him fix the leak? The room froze. Ethan looked at the floor. Dominic slowly turned his head toward her. This is not your decision, he said. No, Avery replied. It is your test. His eyes flashed. Caleb shook harder. Avery stepped closer, her voice calm. Grant knew exactly how you would react. He bought a weak man, put my name in the middle, and waited for you to become predictable. Dominic said nothing. She continued. If you punish Caleb the way everyone expects, Grant learns nothing except that you are still easy to steer when someone touches what matters. The room held its breath. Dominic looked at Caleb for a long time. Then he crouched in front of him. Caleb whimpered. Dominic's voice dropped to something almost gentle. You are going to call Grant's man. You are going to tell him you found another file. You are going to give him exactly what I tell you to give him. If you warn him, if you run, if you lie badly, your brother will still be breathing, but every man he owes will belong to me by morning. Caleb nodded wildly. Dominic stood. Ethan exhaled so quietly only Avery heard it. Dominic looked at her, and in his expression was fury restraint and something like reluctant gratitude. Avery crossed her arms. That almost looked like growth. Ethan made the mistake of laughing under his breath. Dominic looked at him. Do you need something? No, Ethan said quickly, enjoying the company culture. The counterstrike began without gunfire. Caleb fed Grant a false access route to what looked like a full copy of Dominic's private leverage files. Grant's people took the bait within 4 hours. Ethan traced the intrusion through 3 servers and a shell company linked to Keller's attorney. Vivian Pierce called Avery the same night. Her voice trembled only once. I have records, Vivian said. Guest lists, donor accounts, foundation transfers. I can get them to you, but not to Wolf directly. Why me? Because if I go to him, I become his problem. If I go to you, maybe I stay a person. Avery met her in the basement restroom of an art museum during a private exhibit opening. Vivian wore pearls and a black coat. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hands were not. She passed Avery a small silver flash drive. Grant has been using my husband's company as a pass-through for 2 years, Vivian said. At first, I told myself I did not know. Then I told myself I could not stop it. Both were comfortable lies. Avery took the drive. Why now? Vivian looked at her reflection in the mirror. Because I watched you burn that file in the hallway. I realized I could not remember the last time I destroyed something that was meant to control me. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Avery put the flash drive in her coat pocket. Thank you. Vivian laughed softly. Do not thank me until we are both still alive next week. The Foundation Board meeting took place on the 42nd floor of the Calder Hotel. Grant did not know Avery was coming until the doors opened. She entered in a cream suit, hair pinned back Samuel's decoded notes in a leather folder under her arm. Dominic came behind her, but not in front of her. Ethan stayed near the door. Vivian sat at the far side of the table, face pale, hands folded. Grant rose slowly. Miss Monroe, he said. I was not aware you had business with the board. Avery placed the folder on the table. That is the problem with hidden business. It tends to invite guests. A few board members shifted uneasily. Grant smiled, but the corners of his mouth were tight. Avery opened the folder. She did not accuse him first. She started with numbers. A restoration grant attached to a building that had been demolished 8 years earlier. A contractor paid through 3 shell companies. A donor account that matched a room sequence in the Ashbury ledger. A transfer routed through Vivian's husband's company and labeled as historical preservation research. One detail became 5. 5 became a structure. The room changed with every page. Men who had smiled at Grant an hour earlier stopped looking at him. A woman from the legal committee removed her glasses and went very still. Someone's phone began buzzing and did not stop. Grant watched Avery across the table. For the first time, his charm had nowhere useful to go. This is an impressive misunderstanding, he said. Avery closed the folder. No, she said. It is architecture. Dominic's contacts moved before the meeting ended. Accounts were flagged. Donors panicked. A federal attorney received Vivian's files through channels that did not touch Dominic's name. Peter Langford tried to leave the state and found his passport under review. Caleb's false file gave Ethan enough to expose the intrusion. By evening, Grant Keller's foundation had become a room with no exits. Avery left the hotel through the parking garage because she refused to let Grant choose the door again. She was halfway to Dominic's car when Grant stepped from behind a concrete pillar. No guards, no smile. Just him, stripped down to the man beneath the polish. You think Wolf respects you because he let you speak today? He asked. Avery stopped. The garage smelled like oil-cold concrete and old rain. I think you are running out of better lines. Grant stepped closer. Men like him do not change. They adjust tactics. Avery did not move. Men like you say that because it comforts you to believe everyone is rotten the same way. His face hardened. Behind her, a car door opened. Dominic got out. Avery felt him before she saw him, but he did not step in front of her. He came to her side. Grant noticed. So did Avery. Dominic's voice was quiet. Walk away, Keller. Grant looked between them, and for one brief second, rage cracked through the last of his elegance. This is not over. Avery held his gaze. For you it is. Grant's eyes burned, but the sound of another car entering the garage made him step back. Public places had become dangerous for him now. Cameras, witnesses, phones, exposure. The tools he had used against others had turned around in his hands. He walked away into the concrete shadows. Avery stood still until his footsteps disappeared. Dominic looked at her. You all right? No, she said honestly. His expression changed. Then Avery reached for his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers as if he had been handed something fragile and undeserved. She did not let him hold too tight. He did not try. Together they walked toward the waiting car, while Chicago glittered beyond the garage exit cold, dangerous and suddenly full of rooms Avery no longer feared entering. Grant Keller did not fall with a scream. Men like him rarely did. He fell in canceled calls, frozen accounts, unanswered messages and doors that had opened for him for years, suddenly refusing to move. By Monday morning, the Calder-Winter Foundation had announced an internal review. By Tuesday, 3 board members resigned with statements full of regret and carefully chosen distance. By Wednesday, a federal office confirmed it had received documents related to financial misconduct, though no one said from whom. Chicago understood without being told. Grant Keller had become dangerous to stand beside. That was how power left a man like him. Not all at once. Not in a pool of blood under a streetlight. It slipped away quietly, one polished hand letting go after another, until he found himself standing in the middle of the room with nothing but his own name for shelter. Dominic watched it happen from his office high above the river. He did not smile. Avery noticed that. She stood near the windows, wrapped in a dark coat, looking down at the city as snow turned the water below into a moving strip of black glass. The skyline rose around them sharp and cold, full of rooms where men were already deciding how to survive Grant's collapse. Dominic stood behind his desk, phone in hand, listening to someone confirm that Peter Langford had accepted protection in exchange for testimony. Ethan leaned against the far wall with a tablet, one ankle crossed over the other, looking more tired than triumphant. When Dominic ended the call, silence settled over the room. Ethan looked up. Langford gave them Keller's routing accounts. Dominic nodded once. Good. He also named 2 aldermen, a judge, and a Port Authority contact. Avery turned from the window. Dominic's expression stayed unreadable, but his eyes sharpened. Then, make sure none of those names touch us. Ethan glanced at Avery, then back to Dominic. Dominic noticed the look. What he asked. Ethan's mouth twitched. I was just enjoying the version of you that says things like that in front of civilians. Avery raised an eyebrow. Civilian Ethan looked at her. My mistake. Architectural weapon. For the first time all morning, Dominic almost smiled. Almost. Avery looked back at the city before he could catch her noticing. The truth was, she did not feel victorious. She had expected relief to feel warmer. Instead, it felt like standing after a storm and seeing what the wind had torn loose. Grant's foundation was unraveling. Vivian was cooperating through an attorney. Caleb Rourke had been sent away under strict conditions alive, but ruined inside by fear and guilt. Samuel had not slept in 2 nights according to the tightness in his voice when Avery called. And Dominic was still Dominic. Controlled, watchful, dangerous, trying. That word mattered, but it did not make everything simple. Later that week, Avery drove herself home from a late meeting in Wicker Park. She knew Dominic hated it. He had said nothing when she took her keys. Nothing when she refused Ethan's offer of a driver. Nothing when she stepped into the cold night alone and looked back through the restaurant window to find Dominic watching her with a stillness that made her chest ache. No orders. No argument. No black SUV following her at the next light. Avery checked because she knew him. Then she checked again because she knew herself. No one followed. By the time she reached Lincoln Park, her hands had loosened on the wheel. She parked outside the bookstore and sat in the quiet car for a moment, listening to the engine tick in the cold. Snow lay thin along the curb. A man walked a golden retriever under the street lamp. Somewhere upstairs, her apartment waited with its crooked floorboards, old books, and a fern she kept forgetting to water. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. She opened the message. Did you get home? She looked through the windshield at the bookstore sign swaying in the wind. Then she typed back. Yes. A second later. Thank you for telling me. Avery stared at those 5 words. Not, I know. Not I had someone check. Not you should have let me send a car. Thank you for telling me." She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. That was the trouble with real change. It did not arrive with thunder. It arrived in small choices that made it harder to stay angry. The next few weeks unfolded in pieces. Grant's name vanished from guest lists. His hotel still stood glittering and cold, but the men around him no longer looked certain when cameras found their faces. A rumor spread that he had left Chicago for New York, then Miami, then nowhere at all. Dominic never confirmed it. Avery stopped asking after the third time he answered with silence because she knew the difference now between a secret that endangered her and one that belonged to the darker rooms of his world. They argued about that difference often. One night in Avery's kitchen, Dominic stood beside the counter while she washed 2 coffee mugs. He had just told her he needed to attend a private meeting at a club near Bridgeport, and that she should not be near that neighborhood after dark for a while. Avery turned off the water. Should not Dominic heard the danger in her tone? He leaned back against the counter, hands visible, voice careful. Poor word choice. Very poor. There may be retaliation from Keller's people. I am telling you because it affects your safety. Are you telling me or steering me? He looked at her for a long second. Telling you, he said. Badly. She studied him, then tossed him a dish towel. Try again. He caught it. His expression was serious, but something softer lived beneath it now. Something that had learned to stay in the room instead of turning into command. There is risk near Bridgeport for the next few days, he said. I would prefer you avoid it. If you choose not to call me before you go so I can give you what I know. Avery dried the mug slowly. That was better. I hated every second of it. I know. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. The argument ended there, not because the issue had vanished, but because both of them had stayed. That was new too. Dominic learned Avery's apartment in small permissions. The first time she gave him a key, his hand closed around it as if the metal weighed more than it did. This is not a standing invitation, she said. I know. It is for emergencies. I know. And coffee. His eyes lifted. Coffee. If I text you that I am out of coffee, you may use the key to bring some. Dominic looked at the key, then at her. You trust me with your locks, but not your coffee supply. I have priorities. 2 mornings later, she woke to the smell of coffee and found a brown paper bag on her kitchen counter still warm. Dominic was not there. The key lay beside the bag with a note. You were out. She smiled for 10 full seconds before she remembered she was trying not to become ridiculous. Ethan noticed anyway. At the restored club one afternoon while Avery inspected the nearly finished west staircase, Ethan stood below with a clipboard he was not using. You are making him strange, he said. Avery did not look down. Dominic was strange before me. He asked me yesterday if the phrase emotionally available sounded weak. Avery froze with one hand on the railing. Then she slowly looked at him. Ethan nodded solemnly. It was a difficult moment for everyone. Avery laughed before she could stop herself. The sound echoed up into the old ceiling, warm and bright. Dominic appeared in the doorway across the room, drawn by it. He looked at her standing halfway up the restored staircase, dust in her hair, sunlight catching along her cheek, and something in his face changed so openly that Ethan quietly found somewhere else to be. Avery saw it. Dominic did not look away. For once, neither did she. Not every day was soft. Samuel came to Chicago near the end of February. Avery met him at a diner in Lakeview, the kind with cracked red booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in self-defense. He looked older than he had at Christmas. Guilt had a way of aging men faster than time. He hugged her tightly, then held her shoulders and looked at her face as if checking for damage. I am all right, she said. No, Samuel replied. But you are standing. They sat across from each other. For a while they spoke like strangers trying not to wake a sleeping animal. Weather, traffic, the restoration work, his blood pressure, her fern. Then Avery placed a copy of one decoded ledger page between them. Samuel looked at it and closed his eyes. I should have burned all of it. Yes, Avery said. He opened his eyes. She did not soften the word. You should have burned it, or you should have told me. You left me with puzzles I did not know were weapons. Samuel's face folded with pain. I thought ignorance would protect you. Everyone keeps saying that to me. I know. No, Dad, you don't. You and Dominic did the same thing from different sides. You both loved me enough to make decisions around me. Samuel looked down at his hands. Avery's voice trembled, but she kept it steady. I do not need perfect people. I need honest ones. The diner noise moved around them. Plates clattered. A waitress refilled coffee. Somewhere by the door, a child laughed. Samuel reached across the table but stopped before touching her hand. Avery noticed the pause. He was asking without words. She gave him her hand. His fingers closed around hers. I am sorry, he said. It was not enough. It was a beginning. That night, Avery told Dominic about the conversation while they walked along the river. The air was bitter, the kind of cold that cut through wool and made every breath visible. Dominic kept his hands in his coat pockets because he knew if he touched her, he would want to keep touching her. Avery told him anyway. He apologized, she said. Dominic looked ahead at the water. Did it help? Yes. No, I don't know. That sounds true. She glanced at him. You are getting annoyingly good at this. At what? Not fixing things. His mouth curved slightly. It is painful, I can tell. They stopped near the railing. The city lights broke across the river in trembling gold. Avery looked at the current. Sometimes I think I am angry at him for trying to protect me. Then I remember he had reason. Then I get angry again because reasons are not permission. Dominic turned his head toward her. No, he said. They are not. The quiet after that felt full, not empty. Spring came slowly. The restored club opened on a rainy April evening. Not publicly. Dominic had no use for ribbon cuttings, but he invited a small group of people tied to the project, a few old contacts, Ethan, Samuel, and Avery. The building glowed. The west staircase had been saved. The marble had been cleaned without erasing its age. The old bar had been restored with dark wood and brass fixtures. Rain blurred the windows just as it had the first day Avery met Dominic there. She stood beneath the skylight looking up through the repaired glass. No water dripped now. Dominic came to stand beside her. You were right about the ceiling, he said. I usually am. About more than the ceiling. She turned to him. He looked uncomfortable, which meant whatever came next mattered. I kept thinking control was the proof that I cared, he said. If I could anticipate enough, secure enough, prevent enough, then nothing I loved would be taken. Avery said nothing. He continued, voice low under the sound of rain. But love that cannot survive another person's choice is not love. It is fear with better manners. Avery's throat tightened. That sounded practiced. It was. How many times? 27. She smiled. Dominic did not. I mean it, he said. I know. Across the room, Samuel watched them with an expression Avery could not fully read. Sadness, maybe. Relief. A father, understanding that his daughter had stepped into danger and had not disappeared inside it. Ethan lifted a glass toward Avery from the bar. She lifted hers back. For one night, the room did not feel like a trap. Weeks later, Dominic took Avery to a house on the shore of Lake Michigan. He did not tell her much before they arrived, only that it was quiet and that she could leave whenever she wanted. That last part had become one of his habits, not because she demanded it every time, but because he never wanted her to wonder. The house stood beyond a narrow road lined with winter-bare trees just beginning to bud. It was not a mansion that surprised her. It was modern and low-built with stone wood and wide windows facing the gray water. The lake stretched beyond the glass, restless under a pale sky. Avery stepped inside and paused. "This does not look like you." Dominic set the keys on a small table near the door. "No, too peaceful." He looked toward the water. "That is why I bought it." "For what?" "For the version of me I did not think I would ever use." The words moved through the room gently. Avery walked to the windows. The lake wind pressed against the glass. She could hear it faintly, a low constant sound like breathing. Behind her, Dominic opened a drawer. She turned when the room went too quiet. He held a small velvet box. Avery's body stiffened before she could stop it. Dominic saw. Of course he saw. He did not come closer. He placed the box on the table between them and stepped back. "This is not a claim," he said. Avery looked at the box, then at him. "Then what is it?" A question. Her heart began to beat harder. Dominic's face was calm, but not cold. There was fear there, uncovered and unweaponized. "I have owned buildings," he said. "Companies, rotes, favors. I have taken things because the world I live in taught me that if you do not take, someone else will." Then you walked into a room wearing red and reminded me that some things become worthless the moment you try to possess them. Avery swallowed. He continued, "I do not want you behind me. I do not want you hidden. I do not want a life where you stay because I made leaving difficult." Her eyes burned. "Dominic, I want you beside me," he said. "Only if that is where you want to stand." He opened the box. Inside was a vintage ring. Simple, elegant. A dark center stone held between two small diamonds set in aged platinum. It did not shout. It did not ask a room to admire it. It looked like something with history, something chosen by a man who had finally learned the difference between value and display. Avery looked at it for a long time, then at him. "I do not belong to men," she said. "I know. I do not belong to this city. I know. I will never be a prize someone wins because he fought harder than the next man." Dominic's voice was rough. "I know." Avery stepped closer to the table. The ring sat between them like a small, shining dare. "Ask me properly," she said. Dominic's breath changed. "Not much." "Enough." He picked up the box but did not reach for her hand. "Avery Monroe," he said, "will you choose me?" The question broke something open in her. Not because it was perfect. Because it was his. Because once in a hallway beneath old photographs and colder lights he had asked her where to stand. Because he had listened when she answered. Because he had failed and tried again. Because she had seen the worst shape of his fear and he had not asked her to worship it. Avery held out her hand. "Yes," she said, "I choose you." Dominic closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, he took her hand with a care that made her chest ache. He slid the ring onto her finger only after she gave him permission with the smallest nod. The fit was perfect. Avery looked down at it. Then she looked at him. "You planned the size. I am observant. That sounds like a confession. It is one of my safer crimes." She laughed and he kissed her. Not like a man taking something. Not like a man proving a point. He kissed her slowly, one hand at her waist, the other still holding her fingers as if trust was not a thing he had won, but something he was being allowed to touch. Later, they sat outside, beneath a covered deck, while the lake moved in the dark. The wind was cold, but Dominic had wrapped a blanket around Avery's shoulders. She had allowed that without making a speech which he seemed wise enough not to mention. For a while they listened to the water. Then Dominic said, "I love you." The words were quiet. No drama, no performance. Avery looked at him. His eyes stayed on the lake, but his hand rested open on the chair between them. Not reaching, not demanding, waiting. She placed her hand in his. "I know," she said. He turned his head, one eyebrow lifting. "That is all I get." Avery smiled softly. "I knew in the hallway. When you were furious with me, especially then." His thumb moved once over her knuckles. "Why? Because you could have forced the room to bend. Instead, you asked me where to stand." Dominic looked at her then, and the guarded parts of him seemed very far away. "I love you too," she said. The words changed his face. Not loudly. Dominic Wolfe would never be a loud man in moments that mattered most. But Avery saw the impact the way his breath caught, the way his hand tightened just enough before he remembered not to hold too hard. She let him hold a little tighter anyway. Across the lake, the horizon vanished into darkness. Chicago was still there behind them, full of power debt, secrets, and men who believed everything precious could be bought threatened or locked away. Avery knew better now. So did Dominic. She did not belong to his world. She did not belong outside it either. She belonged to herself. And because of that, her choice had weight. In the months that followed, people would tell the story in fragments. They would say Grant Keller miscalculated. They would say Dominic Wolfe had finally met the one person he could not command. They would say Avery Monroe walked into a gala as bait and walked out as the woman who helped break an empire. Some would make it sound romantic. Some would make it sound dangerous. Both would be true. But none of them would understand the quietest part. The part where a powerful man learned to open his hand. The part where a woman who had spent her life reading exits finally chose to stay in a room because the door remained unlocked. Avery leaned her head against Dominic's shoulder as the wind moved over the water. He did not ask if she was sure. He did not need to. Her hand was in his by choice. And for Dominic Wolfe, who had once believed love meant holding on at any cost, that choice became the only vow that mattered.